Hi, I'm Tony Scott. I'm the director of Top Gun. My first movie was The Hunger. Top Gun was my second movie, and we made it in '85, and it was released in '86. And I just come from doing The Hunger, which is a very dark ride, a very dark esoteric ride, and when the guys first offered me Top Gun, I couldn't quite see it. It took me 3 rounds with Don Simpson, Jerry Bruckheimer to get a handle on what I wanted to do with it. I wanted to make Apocalypse Now an aircraft carrier, yeah, and they said no. Think again. So I kept thinking. I came back, and on the third go round, I said, okay, I got it. This is rock and roll stars, flying silver jets against blue-black skies. And it was a piece of rock and roll, this movie, and it was a pure rock and roll, hand in the popcorn, should be fun ride, and try and put the audience into the cockpit of one of these jets. So I was about to fly back to London because I didn't think I was going to be doing it, and Jerry took me to a meeting with Ned Tannen, who's then the head of Paramount Studios, yeah, and I was going to Ned's house to actually pitch him my vision of Top Gun. I'd never pitched the head of a studio before, and I completely dried. I couldn't actually say, I couldn't even remember my name, never remember the title of the movie, so it was rather embarrassing for beginning. This opening sequence here was, as you see all the stuff on the aircraft carrier, was all, I shot it in slow motion with graduated filters, and it was sort of artsy and dark and, again, esoteric, and Paramount saw these dailies when I was out shooting on the aircraft carrier, and they panicked and forbid me to shoot another foot of slow motion footage, yeah. So I was very deceptive. I shot 1 roll of normal footage and then continued to shoot all the rest of it in slow motion because I had a vision about how this beginning should look. Unfortunately, they sent the wrong rolls back, and they sent the slow motion rolls back. So I was fired, yeah. My contract was terminated, but we were stuck on the aircraft carrier and couldn't get back because the weather sucked, so I just kept shooting. I was fired actually 3 times on Top Gun. One was for shooting this opening sequence in slow motion because I thought I was trying to do an art house movie. And the second, I was with Kelly McGillis. I made it look beautiful in a sort of what's the word, whorish way, I suppose. Yeah, and the studio took away my 9-inch pumps, and they took away my makeup lady, and in an effort to actually get Kelly looking a little more down to earth. But unfortunately, it didn't work. We had to go back and reshoot those scenes, so I got fired the second time for that. And the third firing was when I pulled the visors down on the helmets for all the guys flying in the jets. I wanted to see the reflections of the sky and everything that was going on around, but obviously it obscured our lead actors a little bit, yeah, so that was another piece of deception that went south. I shot 4 rolls of the visor down, 1 roll with the visors up, and they got the wrong rolls. I think the camera department was out to try and sink me. So that was the third time they fired me anyhow. So funny stories, but true stories, yeah. But when I say fired me, I really did think on the last time that was it, I was out. And the last time I thought, God, it's over. But it was, lasted for 24 hours, and I was reinstated.
I'm Jerry Bruckheimer. I'm one of the producers of Top Gun. Top Gun was an article that I found in, I think it was called California Magazine. It was about these pilots in San Diego, and the problem the military had, at least the beginning of the Vietnam War, where the ratio of enemy planes going down was not what they wanted. It was like 3-2 or 3-1, and that wasn't acceptable. And so they had to figure out why this was happening to their pilots. Why weren't they excelling the way they thought they trained them? And what they found out is that they were overly trained in technology rather than in actual aviation and dogfighting. So they had to figure out a way to correct that. So they created this school in San Diego, in Miramar, called the Top Gun School, where they invited 1 member of every squadron from their carriers, and usually it was the best pilot, to come to the school, and they were trained by the best pilots in the Navy. And they took them through this course on how to dogfight. And that pilot had to go back to his carrier group and teach his other pilots, his comrades, on the same kind of dogfighting techniques. And it went from a 3-2 or 3-1 to like 8 or 9-1 once they implemented this program. So it changed quite a bit and saved a lot of American lives. I saw this visual and these great names of the characters because they all had these call signs like Hollywood and Bozo and Radio and just all this wonderful stuff. And there was this great photograph, if I remember correctly, and it was a shot in the cockpit, and you saw this huge helmet with a reflection of a jet in the helmet and 2 jets behind him. And I said, God, this is Star Wars on Earth. This is something we should get involved in. And we were, Don and myself was my partner at the time, we're under contract to Paramount. So we took it to Jeff Katzenberg. And so this is an article we want to buy. And he was excited about it. He bought it. And at the time, there were two writers that Jeffrey was using quite a bit to a lot of success, and they were cash-in apps, and they were very expensive in those days. I think we paid him like $300,000 or $400,000, which was a fortune, to write the screenplay. And it showed a real commitment on Jeffrey's part and his belief in the movie. And so they were the initial writers on the project. Unfortunately, a television series had come out after they turned in the screenplay that was about the Air Force in the 50s or 60s, and it died a miserable death. So, the powers that be at Paramount felt that this project really wouldn't go anywhere because the public has no interest in aviation. Don and myself were vehemently opposed to that point of view, and after we were told by Paramount to put the script in turnaround, even though it was a wonderful script, which means Don and I couldn't travel with it because our deal at the time meant that we were stuck at Paramount, we're exclusive to Paramount, couldn't go to another studio once the movie was taken out of there. Somebody else would produce it. Don and I went and orchestrated a meeting with Eisner and Katzenberg to plead our case to keep the project at Paramount so we could produce it. And Don, was so convincing to Michael. He actually got on his knees and begged him to keep the project and let us have one more shot at it. And Michael said, fine, if these guys are so passionate about making this movie, you got to let them have another shot at it. But what happened, after we saved the project at Paramount, Michael and Jeffrey left and went to Disney. So we had a whole new regime come in. And Don Steele was the head of production, and Ned Tannen came in as the president of the studio, or chairman of Paramount. And he asked us to have lunch with him and Don, and he said, I've looked at all the stuff we have here at Paramount, and the cupboard is bare. What are you guys working on? And we said, we have this project we love. It's called Top Gun, and it's about these aviators. And we told him the story that we developed. And he said, great. What do you think it's going to cost? I said, I don't know, $14, $15 million. And he said, go make it. It was that simple.
Hi, I'm Jack Epps. My partner Jim Cash and I wrote the screenplay of Top Gun. One of the things that we really wanted to make sure before we took the job is that this movie would be shot at 28,000 feet. It could not be shot in a sound studio. There was no digital effects at that time. It had to be up in the sky. It had to look like something we'd never seen before, and it did. The imagery is fabulous.
So Top Gun was really my first skirmish in terms of a true Hollywood movie, because the other movie I'd shot in London, even though it was done for MGM. It was a whole different experience for me because this was Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. They were at the beginning of their peak. They'd just done Flashdance and Beverly Hills Cop 1 and then Top Gun. And these two guys, they had a vision. They had a vision about bringing a new look to movies. And Jerry was the one who's out there saying, I like what commercial directors are doing, rock video directors. So that's why he gave Adrian Lyne his first crack at Flashdance. And he gave me my first crack at Top Gun. And they were unique in terms of they trusted that we had the ability to tell a story as well as create different images and different visuals from what you normally got from what they felt were more standard Hollywood movie directors. And that's what the boys were looking for, the boys being Don and Jerry. They were the only guys who had the courage after the hunger to re-employ me, because the rest of Hollywood blacklisted me, said, God, this guy's dangerous. Yeah, they were looking around for some guy that they thought could actually shoot aerial footage, yeah, and because obviously Top Gun, so much of it takes place in the air, and Don said the last guy that they saw that actually directed any real sort of aerial movies was Howard Hawks, yeah. And yeah, so they saw The Hunger, which is my vampire movie, and then they saw my commercial reel. And on my commercial reel, I had a Vingan jet chasing or racing with a Saab car. And I think that was the only bit of footage that they could find that was contemporary that involved jets. So that's how I got in the running for Top Gun. Even at that stage, my process was always to do a lot of research. So I went down to the base at Miramar, and we found a point man at Miramar who was Pete Pettigrew, who was an ex-Top Gun pilot. And I spent time with the pilots and watched and observed and listened to and drank with, and a very interesting group of guys. Yeah, Pete was our point man, and then I was able to actually sit in on Top Gun classes just to get a sense of what these guys were about. And it was a fascinating process. Yeah.
This is Captain Mike Galpin. My call sign is Flex, and I flew the MiG-28s in the Top Gun movie.
My name's Pete Pettigrew. Viper's my call sign. Rear Admiral retired, and I was the technical advisor on the movie.
Vice Admiral Mike McCabe, call sign Wizard. I was the executive officer as we began the script writing and initial discussions about the movie.
Executive officer of Top Gun. Is that right?
That's correct.
What are you doing, man? We've got no fuel for this. We're going after Cougar.
And that was so unrealistic that I was happy with this when they finally switched it around to where he actually just went around.
That lieutenant ordered that he be launched again.
That's right. The lieutenant ordered the captain of the ship to launch him.
Now, this is not unrealistic, though. If you had problems with your airplanes, particularly in the old days, when you're paired up, the other guy would lead you back to the ship and drop you off and stay with you on the approach to the ship, as they're showing here.
Yeah, this is not all that unrealistic. He could have vertigo or something like that, where he couldn't, either that or he just thinks his wife is really good looking. I'm not too sure, but there were times when you had vertigo and you had to be helped because you thought you were upside down. And we had a guy one time that thought he was hanging in the straps upside down when he was right side up, and he was pretty screwed up, and we finally had to divert him.
Obviously, the guys doing the talking and the coaching right now would be the landing signals officer from the ship. Maverick would not be doing the coaching.
Now, this sort of really came out of the interviews with the different pilots, because they would talk about just their fear of night carrier landings and trying to put that plane down into that small little aircraft carrier. It's a tiny place to stick a plane, and you've only got a certain amount of feet to sort of stick the plane. You miss it, you're going over into the end.
A little bit excessive rocking in here. They would have
I think
said
they'd have
goodbye.
probably pickled him and said, come bring it out. Let's try it again.
Yeah, he never would have gotten aboard. But in this case, he did.
Now, immediately, all your gas problems are gone because you're home, and the fuel gauge shrinks from 3 inches in diameter back down to its normal half-inch size.
That's right.
One of the things that the fighter pilots always would tell you is that you've got to believe going to every engagement that you're the best, that you are the best pilot in the sky, and that you are going to be able to beat that enemy. And that's sort of what the psychology is here. Cougar, as a great pilot, knows that he just can't do it anymore. He no longer has that edge that he needed. And unless he has it, he'll never win.
Again, not unrealistic. I had an individual in my command do just that. Come back for the second cut pass and came into my office as when I was commanding officer and did just exactly that. And we sent him home off the ship that afternoon.
And in fact, I've had that happen to me too. I had a kid that had trouble landing, and we sent him back, and he ended up going someplace else. It's not uncommon.
Not for everybody.
When we got the script from Cash and Epps, we felt that the perfect actor, and it really came from them, was going to be Tom Cruise. They'd seen him in Risky Business, and they felt he was the right guy to play Maverick. We'd sent various versions of the script to Tom. There was interest, but he would never really sign on the dotted line. We just couldn't get him to say yes. And he just finished a movie called Legend with Ridley Scott, and he had this long ponytail. And I called the information officer at the Pentagon, and I said, look, we need to close this thing with Tom. One of the Blue Angels is going to be around. And they were in El Centro for an air show. So I got a hold of Tom's agent, who's now his partner, Paul, and I said, look, we'd like to send Tom down there and let him take a flight, let him see what it's really like to be one of these planes and be a pilot. So here Tom, jumps on his motorcycle, drives down to El Centro and pulls off his helmet. He's got these long ponytails. So right away, these pilots say, oh, we got this hippie coming in here. We're going to give him the ride of his life. And so they spin him at 3 or 4 Gs or 5 Gs and turn him upside down. I'm sure he threw up all over the plane. But when he got on the ground, he went to the nearest phone booth because mobile phones weren't in fashion or around in those days, and called me and said, I'm doing the movie. That's it. So he loved the speed, loved the excitement of it, loved the pilots.
When I came to Top Gun, Tom Cruise was already attached. Yeah, he was the only piece of cast that was attached, and then so I went to work with Margie Simkin. That was the first time I'd actually worked with her. First time I'd been really working in Hollywood. Yeah, and we just started to piece it together, trying to balance, Tom's personality with Goose's personality, and I thought Anthony Edwards was a perfect balance in terms of Tom's maverick quality and Goose's charming and sweet and with edges that came out of a sense of humour. Yeah, so the balance of the two I thought was a great combination. And then we went to the competition, and the competition was Val Kilmer, and Val I thought was a perfect foil against versus Tom's character. So again, it's like bouncing personalities. It's like, let's say my painting was always my background. It's like bouncing one colour against another. And it's funny, when I'm actually casting, even then I was casting Top Gun, I'd take pictures of all the boys and get a huge wall and just put up all the pictures of all the contenders, and then start to shift them around on the board and start to look at them. And I'd almost look at them like colours on a canvas, as opposed to, but it's more to do bouncing, personalities, what I knew of them from other roles in other movies.
It is very unique to get picked to go to Top Gun. A very small percentage of the fighter squadrons get to go. Typically, it's your hardest decision as a CO, which crew you send, usually 1 out of 14 every 2 years. And they only run, at that time, 48 students through per year, so it's very selective.
The Top Gun school wasn't very fancy. It was really sort of end of the runway. That all the rooms were sort of looked like used classrooms. We named Viper as an homage to Pete Pettigrew, who was our technical advisor, because Pete was just an amazing fighter pilot, respected among his peers, a MiG killer in Vietnam, and just an amazing guy. Ran the Ironman in Hawaii before anybody knew it existed. The real fighter pilot's fighter pilot.
When we met with the Navy, we said we needed a coordinator to work with us, somebody who'd actually flown jets. And Pete was considered a MiG killer because he'd shot down, I don't know, one or I don't know how many MiGs he'd shot down in Vietnam. And he came in and became our advisor because he was one of the best pilots in the Navy. And had just recently retired, but he still was flying because he was in the Navy Reserve. So he came in and read our script, gave us notes on how to make things more accurate. And then he became our coordinator for everything with the Navy. Anything went through Pete's hands or his eyes, and he's just a phenomenal individual and did a lot of really hard work. And I think you can blame him or praise him for the authenticity of Top Gun because of his keen eye and making sure that Tony got what he needed, but also got stuff that was as accurate as you can do in a Hollywood movie.
There really is no Top Gun trophy, and I hope I'm not sort of hurting anybody's feelings here, but it's something we created because we want to have a sense of competition that we could at some point say, here's who the best is. And ultimately, I think the best pilot here is Iceman. He is a better pilot than Maverick because he is going to go into the turns and you know what he's going to do. You have a sense of it. He's not going to be a little too out of control. Maverick becomes a better pilot once he sort of learns to stay with his wingman.
I think the scene is interesting, having been, an instructor, having stood in front of this crowd. It is very interesting because they look just like that, and everyone there is trying to figure out whether he is better than the guy next to him, and is he better than you, and how is he going to stack up. So this scene is actually is very realistic with just the type of angst going on between the crews, and who's going to measure up, and can I come back here and do this.
If there were a Top Gun trophy, probably these guys are so competitive that they'd probably kill each other before the end of the of graduation, and nobody'd graduate from Top Gun.
The thing about call signs, you cannot give yourself a call sign. I remember a story once a guy gave himself a call sign. His call sign was Shark. So, of course, he was known as Minnow for the rest of his Navy career.
Now, actually, we'll tell them some dirt about Top Gun. One of our instructors, when I was there, had a secret call sign known as the Assassin, and when we had the class introduce themselves, if any of the class looked like they had a little bit too big an ego,
an exceptional
their
cockiness.
first hop was an opportunity to ride against the Assassin, and they would be humbled to the point that they were much more pliable the next time you got to deal with them from an instructional basis.
Jim writes great dialogue. I mean, a lot of this dialogue here, it just represents that great Jim Cash touch, who has just a wonderful flair and a banter back and forth, and he's done it just time and time again. It was such a pleasure to work with him. The Oak Club was pretty wild. In the early 80s, it was really wild. And right when we went to the base in Miramar, they just had stopped having strippers come because the Admiral's wife finally said, I think it's too much in the early 80s. In San Diego, the Oak Club was a place to come. When we were taken there, it was a place for San Diego local girls to come out and meet the fighter pilots.
Pilots are guys that love life. In their careers, they push it to the edge, and outside, they push it to the edge too. And there was this club on the base called the O Club, or the Officers Club, and there was one night a week, it was Monday or Tuesday, I don't remember what night, where all the pilots would come, all the Top Gun pilots and all the hotshot pilots would hang out in their flight suits, and our actors were right in there with them, so they became pilots. They had their flight suits on, and they were in there having a ball with the real guys.
Wednesday nights at Miramar are obviously very infamous. I know something that's not necessarily that widely known, however, is obviously during the class, we have rules to live by, 12 hours bottle to throttle. The instructors would show up, and again, pretty much about 1900, which is, again, 7 o'clock, the staff is pretty much leaving, and obviously if we stayed late and drank, then the students would too, obviously breaking that cardinal rule. So this scene right here with them pounding down shooters and sucking down beers, real world, again, they'd be pretty much hightailing out if they were going to get in that cockpit here in about a dozen hours.
And they would not be wearing whites. They'd most likely be in khakis.
It's true, but it does make it look, it's a little Hollywood there. This scene I always thought was kind of interesting. I'm sure that the concept was actually, there used to be an old Ramones song that at Miramar, again, about normally late Wednesday night, if we were still around, Reed, we didn't have an early brief the next morning. Basically, the whole gang would get up and change the words to some quite rude words in sync with the Ramones song. And that's the only way I could think, maybe Gru's got more to add, on how they came up with this singing concept. We did sing, but it was never quite as orchestrated as this.
We all talked, and this is one of the songs that I had always loved. I am a big Righteous Brother fan. It was easy to sing, and it sort of fit in. And we actually discussed it, and they said, "Oh yeah, we can do that. We can sing that." So they rehearsed it a couple times. I think they rehearsed it about 4 times, and then just did it, and it worked out very, very well.
Kelly McGillis. Kelly had just seen in Witness and seen her take her top off in Witness. That's the real reason she got the part. And Kelly was great, and in the studio were pushing me to go something a little more Hollywood, a little more rock and roll, and maybe somebody that looked a little younger. And I looked at Kelly, I believed that she had the intelligence and the sophistication to be believable in this role. And they were pushing other younger, I want to say more fashionable actresses at me, but I thought in the end Kelly was believable, being able to teach these Top Gun pilots, teach them their tricks and teach them what they're meant to do in combat. And I actually met a real woman in Fighter Town in Miramar in San Diego who was the role model for Kelly, and I think she was 2 years older than Kelly and had a similar sort of personality, so she became the role model for Kelly's character.
Just arrived, so it's been great talking to you. Perry. Hi. Here you go. I'll be with you in just a second, okay? Listen, can I ask...
My great scene, my 15 minutes of fame is coming up
Now,
there.
the shots are going to come on that in just a second.
Incoming.
I'm an older guy in a very old movie. This is I'm Kelly McGillis' date in the bar scene, and you'll see me come in a yellow shirt, and I don't spend much time. I run to the back. My name is Perry Seidenthal. Oops,
There's
there's
Drew.
the guy in the yellow shirt.
Actually, at the premiere in San Diego, the first CO of Top Gun, Roger Box, fired out for the entire crew to hear, and Pettigrew loses the girl again.
We encountered one major problem. We decided to shoot the picture in San Diego. The base there is Miramar, and we had to get the approval of the base commander. So when you think you're at the highest level, you still have to go down to the lowest levels and get their approval also. So the base commander read the script and says, "I'm not going to let you shoot on my base. We don't allow our officers to fraternize with enlisted people or other officers," because we had this love affair between Kelly McGillis and Tom Cruise, and they were both in the Navy. So we said, well, what females do you come in contact with that are not in the military? Would be a realistic relationship. And he said, we have these evaluation teams that come in from like the RAND Corporation. They hire these companies to come in and evaluate their pilots and their war games. So when they got a war game, they have these people write up. It's just like coming in and evaluating a corporation. And they said, we've had this one girl, which we met, who was very attractive, and she evaluated their performance. And that's where the Kelly McGillis character changed from an officer to a civilian. And then it got his approval based on that.
Kelly McGillis's character here was actually a female named Christine Fox that works for Center Naval Analysis that was doing a lot of real good tactical development at ComFit, basically in terms of outer air battle tactics and how to defend the carrier against the Russian hordes. Remember, this is 80, so we're still in the Cold War. So her character is basically built loosely around Christine Fox.
I did take a leap of faith in terms of dressing Kelly in seam stockings and short skirts and makeup and stuff, but that was me doing my thing, trying to do a piece of rock and roll with this movie, which the studio were very wary of. The Navy were a little skeptical because they had other movies that they'd cooperated with that in their end result they weren't very happy with. And so the Navy were a little skeptical about what we wanted to do with this movie, because they'd never seen a real aerial movie, and I think this was the beginning of a kind, yeah. So the Navy themselves, the brass, were a little skeptical, and we had to go to Washington on 2 different occasions and actually pitch the story and pitch ourselves, and there was a little skepticism about Hollywood, versus the military, or the military being the Navy. But, Miramar and the base where we actually shot, they embraced us there. The guys there were fantastic.
That's classified. It's what?
When I was doing the research and interviewing the pilots, I had a hard time understanding what they were talking about because they kept talking in acronyms. So I didn't want to sound stupid and ask them what they were talking about because I'm supposed to know it. They all knew about it, and they would just sort of go on about all these different terms, the RAG, the RIOs, all these different things, hops, all this sort of stuff. And so Jim and I made a decision that we weren't going to explain it at all. We were just going to put it in the movie just exactly as we heard it and let the audience try to figure it out. And if they figured it out, they'd get it. If they didn't, they wouldn't. But we wouldn't explain it. And I think that authentic dialogue really plays well in the movie. It really puts us into the world without us trying to create it. I mean, it's their dialogue. It's how they speak. And I think for that reason, all those fighter pilot sequences feel really fresh. It doesn't feel like it's canned. I've seen a lot of things since then, and I always just go, "Oh, come on, guys, you're trying too hard."
What were you doing there?
Communicating.
Now, in truth, gentlemen, there were some exchanges between us and the Russians when we did join up on them, but they weren't their fighters, they were patrol aircraft. And they would hold up signs or pictures or
Mostly
make
Playboy.
various gestures
It was
with
always
us.
Playboy,
and,
Playboy pictures.
Is always very, again, having done the same thing, always very positive in terms of, holding up vodka, holding up magazines, and just basically, they're doing their job, and we're doing our job, and we don't set the policy, we just execute it.
1,000 feet. There'll be no engagement below that. Move it!
The movie Top Gun in the end cost 16.5 million. Yeah, which was I think is fantastic, and I think the budget was kept at that price because of Washington helped us a lot. They really just charged us for fuel. They charged us, but it's very expensive. I think it's $10,000 an hour to run one of these F-14s. So I was always on a tight budget in terms of how many hours I could fly these jets. What was interesting in the process was when we went out to do aerial sequences, I'd do a storyboard of what I envisioned this aerial sequence to be. So I'd storyboard it. And let's say there were 6 jets flying in this one mission. I would give my storyboards to the flight commander who was flying the lead jet, and we'd have these meetings at 3 a.m. in their their briefing room. I'd stand there with these little toy jets saying the sort of thing I imagined, and then the flight commander would reinterpret what I was trying to say, and he'd take a copy of the storyboards and he'd gaffer tape it onto the interior of his cockpit, and each of the other guys would get them and would break the number of shots down into maneuvers, and then he'd just, in the air, he'd just call it. So they'd work it out in the briefing room, who was doing what, and in the air he'd just call it. He'd say, okay, and maneuver 1, and then the 6 jets would go one, all different directions. And depending on the maneuvers, we'd mount the cameras either on the nose of the F-14s, on the wingtip of an F-14, or on the belly of an F-14. And that took us a long time from the FAA, just in terms of getting permission to do that, because obviously it's dangerous. There's so many G-forces when these jets are flying in combat like this, or even simulated combat for movies, that the cameras had to be very secure because they would come off and could obviously hurt somebody. I think there were 3 Top Gun pilots, and they were flying these F-14s as our camera ships. And each of them, after one mission, because these guys have such an uncanny understanding that the F-14 becomes an extension of themselves. So an uncanny understanding of what the camera was getting for them when they were flying, head on at 6 feet next to another plane, etc. But they learned very quickly. They saw that each of the 3 pilots saw the first day's dailies and said, "Oh, I get it." And after that, I don't think they ever missed a take. We could only afford to do 2 or 3 takes maximum. And because we only had short film loads, we only had 100-foot film loads because of the size of the cameras that we could mount.
Now, this is my favorite scene. If you slow it down on your DVDs, you can see a piece of the F-14 come off and go right above the A-4.
What piece was it?
Overwing fairing, I think.
Let's see what you got now, Chester. Okay, man, let's turn and burn.
We got a lot of help with Pete Pettigrew in terms of trying to figure out some of the choreograph and things that would happen. We really wanted to make this movie authentic when we were writing it. We wanted to make it based on what's really going on with these guys and how they really fly, so that we could put together really good engagements so that each engagement would be unique and different. What we didn't want to do is just throw down and say, and then something happens. We made sure we had this fight scene choreographed beat by beat. The writer couldn't ask for a more perfect plane than the F-14 because it allowed us to have a buddy in the movie and allowed Maverick to have someone to talk to and think with, as opposed to like an F-18, which is a single-seat plane. They really capture a great relationship between the reel and the pilot, because the back-seater is the guy who's really watching the plane in front and telling him where he is, since he's doing all the radar work.
Get your butts above the hard deck and return to base immediately. Yes, sir.
In this particular sequence here, you say, after Tom wins his first training mission, they're flying back in, and he thought it'd be an interesting or fun thing to do to buzz the tower, which was verboten, which is not liked or allowed, because it was thought to be dangerous, because the tower was only, 40 feet tall, and, to get down level with the tower, you're flying That's dangerous. Yeah. So the guy elected to buzz the tower was Bozo, of course. Yeah. So here's Bozo coming up to be grounded yet again. So Bozo buzzed the tower at 40 feet and blew out all the windows of the back of the chief of the base office. All his French windows were blown out after he'd been told not to do it. So Bozo was really maverick. Yeah. Bozo, I don't know where you are today, but you enlightened my life. Yeah. So he was truly a representation of Tom's character in the movie.
Okay, now, locker rooms. Here's the deal. If you're an athlete, you spend a lot of time in locker rooms, and teams get put together in the locker rooms. So the reason there's locker rooms is because it's where groups come together. It's where sports teams come together. Guys get traded and get added to a team just because they're great in the locker room, because they're the ones that can inspire guys. And also, the Top Gun school and the fighter pilots had some pretty cool locker rooms. I mean, there's all this neat gear around. These guys are such, I mean, they really capture this on-edge feeling here. I think it's great. I mean, Tony Scott did a great job sort of capturing the feeling of these guys who are just ready to go head-to-head, but they won't, because it's part of a great tradition from, World War I fighter pilots, and it continues to this day.
When this was first written, I was asked, Viper, what's the locker room look like at Top Gun? And I said, it's on a half deck, and they keep their gear in there. And they said, well, do they take showers? And I said, no, they don't take showers. So, that was really fake, but in fact, it becomes very important because there's a lot that can be said in a locker room that can't be said anyplace else.
Tom Skerritt was somebody I'd always loved, because he was an alien with my brother, Ridley. And Ridley cast him an alien. I thought Tom was a perfect commander of the base because he's got this laconic, this quiet, unruffled sort of quality to him.
You hope you have a good eye for casting, and even small parts, became big stars. So, in fact, one just won an Academy Award. Each one had a kind of a certain character that we wanted to bring forth to the screen, and so you just keep looking at actors until you find the ones that you feel are right for those particular roles, and unique and different, and look different, and have different personalities, so they'll work well and be individuals rather than one that are homogenous and kind of all cookie-cutter examples of one another. And you do that through casting. I think it was Marge Simkin who cast the movie and did an amazing job of finding these young kids. Val Kilmer being somebody who'd just been on Broadway or off-Broadway in a play, and she was very excited about him, as Tony was, and Don and myself. So you just keep going through these young kids who are coming up, and we found what we felt was a great compliment. Tony Edwards, which was a character we loved because the character had to have a lot of humor, had to be very likable, and Tony is that to the T, and he's a wonderful actor. So we were lucky to kind of put this kind of interesting group together.
And Anthony Edwards, Anthony, he's got such a great quality to him on screen, and he was so good as a foil to Tom's character. He's got such a brilliant, odd sense of humour, and there's a lot of lines, a lot of situations that Anthony improvised, and we capitalised, and I used in the movie directly, or we built sequences off. And Michael Ironsides, who was really an unknown at that stage, was a perfect balance with Tom Skerritt, because he's tough and angry, and he's got the scar on his face, and he's Canadian.
Actually, there is some truth in this, in that sometimes the people that are the best in combat are not necessarily the people that are the best when there's no war going on. It seems that there's some people that are really, really good administratively and do well when we're not in combat, and there are other people that are just not natural combat aviators, and they're not necessarily the same. And it's sometimes hard to figure out who's who. And when he says, who would you rather go in combat with, that's probably an actual serious question.
It's interesting, in the earlier drafts, we also had a lot more competition between squadrons themselves, because within squadrons, Wolf Pack, Black Knights, there's a lot of competition among squadrons. And that sort of worked its way out. So part of the competition between Iceman and Maverick was really a competition between squadrons. And also in our earlier drafts, we had more personality in the planes. I think that, as the pilots will tell you, each plane has a personality of its own, and they have their own planes, and they all do things a little bit differently. But I think Tony Scott made the right choice in terms of just pruning that stuff down, and so that it just doesn't become about too much, and it's more of the competition among the guys. But I always sort of like that squadron rivalry, because it's really one of the stronger rivalries within the pilots in the Navy.
Find this interesting. This is obviously probably late in the evening, and Maverick obviously is depicted studying, and that's, again, very realistic. Again, an average day, kids, they'd show up about 6:30. We'd give them academics probably till mid-morning, 10 or 11 academics, basically no time in between, not very many breaks. You're not taking half-hour coffee breaks here. It's lecture, 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 right to the flight brief, 2 flights, get home at night, wolf down a sandwich, and then study. You see Maverick kind of looks tired here. You were by the end of that first day. The pace at Top Gun is horrendous, and even as an instructor, it takes a while to kind of get that motor running at that speed for that length of time.
This was when Tom really used his smile which became infamous in terms of his sexuality and his charm. And Tom is not 6 foot tall, and Kelly is. But Tom's taller than me, let's say. But him and Kelly walking together, we actually found a pair of cowboy boots, which again became infamous. We found them. I didn't find them. My wardrobe lady found them. And they're a pair of funky looking, look like a pair of boots that Bruce Springsteen should be wearing. And we gave them to Tom.
To ask me out for dinner.
No.
No?
No. I don't date students.
And Venetian blinds and that lighting effect you get through Venetian blinds and fans in the ceiling. I mean, that was all part and parcel of the base at Miramar. But it was something that at that point in time was, I'd begun to sort of look, especially in the Hunger. You know, I think that was the beginning of the Venetian blind era. And fans, all this stuff was what I saw in the base and what inspired me to go in that direction. It was shot in a pretty straightforward manner. But I think this was the right look for this movie because I say it was a movie about rock and roll stars of the skies. It was a full-on popcorn fun rock and roll ride, you know, and I think the style that we adopted for that vision was right, even though it wasn't as artsy or strange or surreal as the Hunger.
They actually built a volleyball court at Miramar, set it up, put all the people there, and when they were done, they tore it down and got rid of the volleyball court and left it a field, exactly what it was to begin with. They were required to put everything back the way it was before, so volleyball was there for 2 days and then gone. One of the other interesting things is the guys that are actually hitting in the volleyball are all stand-ins, and they're all real volleyball players, and they made them up to look exactly like the real guys. But when you see a real good hit there, that's all being done by stand-ins that look just like them. But it was amazing that you just can't tell the difference the way they edited it.
This, again, is another, when it's not infamous, it's famous volleyball scene that, to be honest, I didn't know what to do with it. The Maverick and the Iceman team playing against each other, yeah. And I didn't really have a vision about what to do with it. I remember this is the scene I struggled with the most, yeah. But in the end, it just became hunky bodies and California sun, but it became a favorite with the women as well as the guys, especially the San Francisco guys.
Tony felt that he should give something for the girls too, you know. And he had all these good-looking guys, and they had great bodies, and he said, "Let's give the girls something to really look at." And I think that was something he created to show the competition among the guys, and also to give the girls something to take home with them and think about.
There's the boots there. You see those boots? I've got them now.
I got some things I gotta take care of. Take care of just one more game.
You know, I think the actual look of the guys, and you know, I kept talking about rock and roll stars of the skies and this particular look, and I kept talking about this movie and how the guys, I wanted them to be rock stars, basically. And I always steal from photographers, and I say Helmut Newton I stole from in The Hunger, and then I found this book by Bruce Weber, which is Bruce Weber's first book, a black and white book, and it was basically guys in the military. And there's this one centerfold, this fold-out page, it's got this guy who looked very similar to Tom, and then in the back seat, a guy looked very similar to Val Kilmer. And I took that picture, not similar just in terms of their haircuts and the style of the picture, but similar in terms of the intent of their eyes, the intent of the characters. And I used that book as a role model for who I believe these guys were. So I showed the pictures to Tom and to Val, yeah, and to the studio. They got a little bit scared because it was infamous in terms of the gay community. This book, so that's where all these haircuts came from, and this sort of hard-edged military look.
I'm gonna just take a quick shower.
First time I met Tom. Well, actually, I met him when he was working with Ridley on stage of Henry's shooting Legend. They're shooting it at Pinewood Studios, yeah, and Tom had a great experience with Rid and also he'd been wooed by Don and Jerry. And so the combination, he really liked Don and Jerry, and the ice was broken for me, and he really had a vision about this character and how he wanted to play it. And Tom had just done Risky Business, and I still think today that's one of his best movies. And he was fantastic in that. And I mean, it was a really great interest. So he was on the rise, and I hadn't even started rising. I was on the bottom. I was the bottom of the ladder after The Hunger. Yeah, and but I think he trusted because I was a Scot, and he had a great experience with the other Scot being Ridley.
Except you didn't forget the wine.
Two of my kids are daughters, and they thought it was really neat. They thought it was neat when Tom Cruise came to dinner.
Oh, there you go.
He was in La Jolla for the whole summer, so he came over, and I gave my kids about 15 minutes notice that Tom Cruise was coming for dinner, and they kind of went, no, he's not coming for. Well, he did. He showed up. Very nice man. He was very young now. I think he was only like 23 years old.
Exactly.
Very nice guy.
We look at him now, and they're untouchable. But at the time, Risky Business hadn't been out that long. He wasn't, a household name. Kelly McGillis had just done Witness, so these were not giant megastars that they are now.
Haven't heard this in years.
You can go and you can say, well, who's the one that's really, really famous now that nobody knows anything about? And it's Tim Robbins. Tim Robbins will show up later on.
He's Merlin.
Yeah, he's Merlin. And then you've got Rick Rossovich has done a lot of stuff. And, of course, Anthony Edwards has become very famous. And
Actually, no one paid any attention to Meg Ryan.
No, yeah,
There you
Meg
go,
Ryan's in there
exactly.
Well, Meg Ryan was only there for a couple of days. She's only in about 4 scenes. And we'll talk about that later. And, of course, Val Kilmer's become very famous. So, I mean, there are a lot of people that became extremely famous out of this particular movie.
Security clearance, you'd know more about him than I do.
This particular piece about his father, in a way, comes from Wizard's father, who was a Second World War and Korean pilot and was killed in an F-9 accident at Alameda Naval Air Station when you were, what, 5 years old? And there was just a little thought about that, although Wizard certainly is not as mavericky as Maverick.
No, that's just where the Hollywood people got the idea.
But who the hell knows? It's all classified.
Somebody must know.
What was really interesting on this project is that Jim doesn't like to fly. In fact, he won't get into an airplane. And so we end up writing one of the most famous flying pictures of all time and a guy who doesn't fly at all. And what was really great about our relationship is that we wrote long distance. We only wrote together in a room one time over a 25-year period. And all our work was really done on the telephone, done by a computer, or send things in the mail. It was really a great relationship. We both we'd have a problem to solve. We'd hang up the phone, think about it, call each other back an hour later, and virtually both have the same solution. It was uncanny at times. We also had different strengths and weaknesses. Jim wrote fabulous dialogue. I mean, he had a real sense of the dramatic, and I love just story and overview and characters and all the little sort of dramatic twists and turns of storytelling. So it was really a wonderful combination. He was a funny guy, great sense of humor, just a memorable person. And he actually never came out to Hollywood. He stayed in East Lansing, Michigan, and I would do all the meetings. And then I'd call Jim and tell him how the meetings went and what the thought was and the feedback. And then many times we do it with speakerphones. So Jim would be in a meeting in speakerphone.
This scene was actually done about 6 months after we finished filming, which we finished in August, the regular filming and production. And she's wearing a hat. And the reason that Kelly McGillis is wearing a hat right there is because her hair is a different color. She's doing a different movie, and they brought her back to do that. So Tom Cruise has quite longer hair because he was doing another movie at the time. The reason they did this is they thought that the relationship between Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis was going too quickly, and they wanted to insert something which sort of softened their relationship and made their relationship look like it was a little more long-lasting. So they added this about 5 months later.
We put together this sequence in an elevator, when they're on base and they happened to connect in this elevator. And this was like 6 months later when Kelly had lost, I think, like 60 pounds, and Tom was actually shooting Color of Money. So we had to move the whole crew and shoot it in Chicago. And so that's why Kelly's wearing this baseball cap, because she'd cut her hair off as well. The movie was a difficult movie knowing how to structure it in terms of shooting. So what we actually did was we shot all the ground story first, which I think took us 6 weeks, 6-day weeks, and then we did all the aerial stuff and odd pickups between the aerial stuff second. This is when we went back and we did a pickup for this particular scene, and we did pickups for the love scene at the same time. And, this particular sequence here, I think this was the beginning of Meg Ryan's career, because I don't know whether Meg had done anything else prior to this, but I thought Meg was a perfect wife for Tony Edwards in this movie, and Meg is so unique because she is sweet and innocent and charming, yet has this great sense of humour. And she has one sequence, after Goose dies, where she breaks your heart, and I think that was the sequence when she came in the casting session. And when she came in, there was no tears when we rehearsed the sequence, but she broke my heart. Whatever she did, she just had a great handle in terms of who she was and how strong the relationship was with her husband being Tony Edwards.
Interesting shot there, how difficult that is to put together and fit in the frame. Again, obviously, both those Toms chasing those A4s are well inside of any weapons employment.
This is called the tax trailer, and this is part of the things we've discovered in research. And as I was researching the picture, we went and saw how they debriefed the fights. Debriefing is really important because every fight, every engagement, they debrief, they go over it turn by turn. They're incredibly detailed. Nothing is left to chance. They discuss hops before they do them, and afterwards they break them down. But it was interesting to see the depth that these guys went to make themselves better. They were constantly trying to improve. It's incredibly low-tech now, but when the movie was shot, this was cutting-edge technology.
And that is the actual trailer that most of Miramar trained in for most of the time we were all there.
This is the state-of-the-art at the time, and we use this exclusively throughout the Top Gun course, as well as in our fleet squadrons.
Also, you can get missile flyout profiles on this, so it also tells you whether a missile that you fired was inside or outside of envelope, and will give you a kill if it's in envelope and give you no kill if it's outside envelope. So it gives you the real envelopes for the missiles, which are sometimes very hard to be able to perceive at the time you're flying. And of course, this was all done in real time, and then they're coming back and debriefing what was done 4 or 5 hours earlier on the actual range.
One other thing to note is that at Top Gun in particular, we use a different form of debriefing. You wouldn't look at the tape until the end of the debrief, and we'd make the students reconstruct based on their notes and recollection, have the Top Gun instructors give their review, and then we'd look at the tape to try to get their skill level up when you didn't have a tax range to be able to conduct sorties with their squadrons and get quality debriefs without having this system. So it's almost a dark art to be able to take notes while you're flying or right after the engagement that are as accurate as you get with a computer system.
And that's very important because you got to realize that these guys, after they graduate from Top Gun, they're being sent back to their squadrons to become training officers, and so they're going to be having to do the debriefs for people in their squadron, and they're trying to raise the level of the expertise within the squadron, and so the ability to debrief is very, very important.
Don and Jerry were a great balance in terms of the work, because Don was a sort of broad stroke ideas man, and Jerry was a great details man and a visualist and fantastic with music. So Jerry was really responsible for all the music in Top Gun, and they had this guy called Harold Faltermeyer who they used, and we'd sit in his mixing suite till the early hours of the morning, Harold was out and out rock and roll, and really had a great handle in terms of writing themes for this type of movie.
There was a composer or an arranger and an engineer that we'd work with a lot with George Moroder, and he was Moroder's arranger. And we kind of believed that he had enormous talent and wanted to give him an opportunity. And so his name was Harold Faltermeyer, German. We sent Harold a script, and Harold, in his own studio at home on his little computer, wrote this theme that he sent to us. It became the Top Gun theme. It was that great guitar piece that we got even before we started filming. So that was the beginning of the score of Top Gun, and we were all very excited about that. And then we had made a deal with, I think it was Columbia at the time, to put out the soundtrack, and we worked with a number of very talented people there to get the songs, and they worked very hard. And I remember we had over 100 songs we had to listen to. They just kept playing more and more songs to us until we narrowed it down to the ones we felt were hits. And Moroder wrote some of them, and one I just heard on the radio, it's just been re-recorded by Jessica Simpson, and that's Take My Breath Away, which was a love theme of the movie.
Over the years, over the decades of movies, love scenes have been shot so many different times, and it's so difficult knowing how to have a point of view, but it's so difficult knowing how to handle these scenes because they've been done to death and done so many times. And I think in the end, for these love scenes, less is more. And I think the true strength of sexuality in love scenes is really the chase before the nasties. and actually capitalizing on that.
You want another one? Really? I feel the need. The need for speed.
This is another great soundbite from Top Gun. I feel the need for speed.
I feel the need for speed sort of just captures the essence of this movie. It really is about living everything at high speed.
Just 2 points behind.
There they are. 3 miles left, 10 o'clock. I don't think they see us yet.
Okay, I see them. 284s, left 10 o'clock level, continue left turn.
And that was pretty good dialogue by Tom Cruise right there. Pretty accurate dialogue
Very.
describing the
It
engagement.
was well written by the technical advisor.
Very, very accurate.
By the way, you wouldn't have your mask off. The mask would have been on for a long
I
time.
was just thinking the same thing.
You can't take time out to put your mask on after you get a visual.
Once again, the Top Gun trophy becomes something that sounds like it's important, but in reality, in the Top Gun school, they never would have something like that because it's really about a learning education. But the fun of the movie is it's really about the competition of these two guys. I mean, who is the best fighter pilot? So some way, somebody's got to say this is the best guy.
Very difficult flying right there in order to put those 4 aircraft in one piece of sky and to get it all framed properly.
The key to that is just telling everybody beforehand, sitting down and talking about it for a long time before you actually fly it. And in this case, it worked out because seemingly the choreography was able to be given to the guys who were flying, and they could actually fly what they thought they were supposed to fly, and it worked out very, very well.
As we mentioned before, here the framing and the need for Hollywood to have all these aircraft in one frame. Pretty hokey here, obviously, of gun parameters, from 1,200 feet on in. Should have taken the shot a long time ago.
Yeah, you get about maybe half a second to take a shot, and if you don't get it, then you just can't chase people around. You're going to get killed yourself right away.
Between the base and Nevada, where the jets were actually housed and where we were shooting, they had to fly for 20 minutes across country. And Nevada has these chicken ranches, which are whorehouses, basically. So that every morning at 5 a.m., these pilots would come across these F-14s, and they'd buzz these chicken ranches from about 30 feet up. And all the roofs of the chicken ranches were corrugated metal roofs, so the sound inside must have been deafening. So we'd sit on top of this mountain with our binoculars and see these guys buzz these whorehouses at 5 a.m. and see all these guys and these pimps coming out at 5 a.m. screaming and yelling.
There's another great shot. Some of this filming is well done. This was a new first, I think, for aviation films.
Okay, Sidewinder missile selected. Come on, baby. Come on, baby.
A lot of the fighter rules developed even in World War I are still true today. In fact, if you total it up, most of the people shot down in all the wars, I think 80% of them, didn't see the guy that shot him until he was already in a lethal envelope.
In fact, the guy that has the most kills of all time is a guy named Erich Hartmann, is a German, and was on the Eastern Front flying against Russians towards the end of the war and never would engage anyone that saw him. His whole concept was, I'm not going to engage anybody that ever sees me. If they see me, I'm leaving. And he had like 380 kills. And
Well, in Vietnam, we lost 12 fighters to MiGs. Only one lost a dogfight. The other 11 were surprised.
that's right. So if you're seen, you're in trouble.
Goose, check our tail. Shit, there's just...
I think that, like anything you do with somebody who really does it for a living, the pilot said, oh, this is Hollywood, the whole dogfight at the end, and they felt it was Hollywood. But when people kept saying, you do that, you guys actually fly those planes, and girls were coming on to them, they liked the movie more and more. So from initially saying, oh, this is a lot of Hollywood, to saying, boy, this is really great for my career and my life and my love life. So it changed their thinking once it became kind of a cultural icon.
I might insert here, as a technical advisor, I might be beating up on the movie a little bit because I know what was supposed to be reality and what was Hollywood, and I tend to be defensive about the whole thing because nobody ever listened to me. And I was trying to make it reality, and here's a good example of guys running around in towels, which really isn't very realistic. On the other hand, my cronies here have said that I've been too hard on the movie, so in all honesty, I did enjoy it, although on a daily basis it could be very difficult when you're fighting with everybody all the time about what should go into the movie and what shouldn't. And again, you notice that they are saying things here that they couldn't say other places. So, in fact, the locker room, although, I was very much against it to begin with, turns out to be a major part of the movie. A lot happens here.
This is the boys in the locker room, yeah. So this was another beefcake sequence which went down. Which got huge applause. I remember this particular sequence because we couldn't shoot on another location, so we changed the schedule that morning at the last minute. And I remember Val was fed up because he hadn't pumped up and hadn't worked out. And then this preparation for this beefcake shirt off scene. Yeah, so Val said, no, we can't do it. In the end, we pushed him to do it.
You know, as they conclude the locker scene, the reality was that you changed in the locker room. A lot of times, we got done so late, the fence was locked. You climbed the fence and changed clothes next to your car.
That's true.
Threw the flight suit in
that
if you were going someplace out, and you just, if you came along about 7:30, 8 o'clock, you'd see all the Top Gun guys stripping down, and because nobody else was on the base at that time before they went home, if they didn't just go home in a flight suit.
And this particular sequence here is where Tony Edwards was playing Jerry Lee Lewis's Great Balls of Fire, but Tony never played piano before. And I was doing my homework the morning of, so I'm up at 4 a.m. and I was trying to get a handle on or point of view and trying to make, how can I make this scene, give it something, get a center to the scene. And it was really just, it was the four of them. It was Kelly, Megan, Tom and Tony sitting around the table eating. And I was sitting doing my prep that morning and I had Jerry Lee Lewis playing on my CD player. And then that was the flash of inspiration that said, okay, let's get Tony Edwards to do Great Balls of Fire. So we sprung it on Tony Edwards the morning. And it was good because it gave an idea behind this particular sequence other than Meg telling Kelly what a checkered history Maverick had with other girls.
This is a writer, when you see the movie and you go, wow, what a great scene. I mean, this is something that was added later, and it's just such a wonderful scene. I love Goose playing piano here. It just adds so much dimension to him. Anthony Edwards is just such a memorable Goose. I mean, you've just got to love him. Meg Ryan just takes a very small role and just blows it up. It's unbelievable. It's always great when you see an actor sort of come into a movie and just suddenly get discovered, and really did it in this movie.
The Kansas City barbecue in San Diego we shot there was a tiny little hole in the wall with great fast food, and then when I gather now it's actually become a Top Gun shrine. But it was funny because we did that sequence there and we couldn't find a resolution to the end of the movie. A resolution being, how are we going to end this story? Where was the story going to end between Tom and Kelly? And we shot two other ends on the base on the runway with Kelly. We cut them together and they didn't work, So Sonny went back. It was an afterthought. Went back to the Kansas City barbecue.
San Diego here is a fabulous backdrop. It really is. I mean, what else could you want? You fly F-14s during the day, and then you got the town of San Diego to play in at night. I mean, what a life. What's not to like? I kept kidding the guys when I was doing the research interviews. I said, you guys you're having too much fun. I'm going to call the Pentagon and complain about it. And they would get real excited and go, oh, don't do that.
Okay, gentlemen, this is hot.
This particular shot here, all the jets leaving early morning, this really was early morning. And the Navy couldn't quite understand how I always wanted to fly my missions, when the light was low as opposed to middle of the day. That was always a struggle, trying to balance your days so you were shooting your big master shots when the light was low and the jets looked fantastic. Yeah, but so it was always a fight with with production and with the Navy saying, but the best time we should be shooting this is the beginning and the end of the day.
But the accident that we see is actually taken from reality from a guy I knew and a friend of Wizards, Bean Barrett. Bean was his call sign. Gary Barrett was his name. A lot of people tell me, well, you made it up. That could never happen. We actually took it from an actual accident. If you notice the shaking there, if you want to know what's happening, is there are four guys around that thing, around the gimbal, and they're shaking it. They're just people shaking the gimbal, trying to make it look realistic.
But you did catch the shaking. If you watch the heads in some of the photos, you'll see how they bounce around in the actual airplane when you're pulling G's and
this is the most. I think this is the most difficult shot in the movie, right there. That was difficult to orchestrate.
That's right. That's right.
You see, Maverick learned his lesson here. He's not going to go off on his own. He's going to go ahead and follow. Stay with your wingman. As I said, the normal gunshot would be about 1,200 feet, and right now they're probably about 200 feet, well inside. If you were to shoot the A4 right now, the A4 would explode in front of him and then fire all of the motors on all the Tomcats, and the whole 3 ship would then crash.
Come on, Ice, get the hell out of there. I can't get the angle. I'm too close for missiles. I'm switching to guns. Ice, fire, or clear.
I remember one morning I get a call around 6 in the morning that we just had an accident, we lost a pilot. The stunt pilots that Hollywood hires are exceptionally gifted and phenomenal pilots. And unfortunately, a lot of them have lost their lives because it's very dangerous what they do. That's why they're stunt pilots, and that's why they got paid quite a bit of money. Art Scholes was one of the great ones. And Art was shooting some plates for us in his plane. He always flew with his little dog, his little white dog that sat on his lap when he flew. And it was getting really late in the day, and the ground person, or his coordinator, because he was out by himself, we just give him a list of shots to do, said, "It's late, why don't you come in?" He said, "Nah, I want to do one more run." And that was his last run. It's unfortunate.
This is the sequence where Maverick's jet goes down with Goose as his backseater, yeah. And when the jet's spinning out of control, we used an old plane, and we mounted a camera on the front of that and did these spirals. And Art Scholl, who was the most famous and the best aerial photographer in the history of movie making, Art was actually shooting these point of view shots with a camera mounted in the front of this plane. And he was shooting in San Diego, and it was sunset, and he came in for his last take. Yeah, so it was sad, very sad, because Art did some great movies. Great, I mean, he did all the aerial movies that had made any mark in terms of the movie industry. Art was the aerial photographer. The Great Waldo Pepper being one of the most famous. Yeah.
And in this particular case, I was asked by Cash and Epps, the two writers, that I had to come up with an accident, and Maverick had to feel responsible for what happened, but had to be vindicated by the Navy, and the Rio had to die. So basically all I did was go back to all the accidents that I'd ever seen or known about and try to find one that fit, and this particular one fit pretty well and was real. I mean, it was taken from a real case. Now, in the particular ejection that happened in real life, nobody was hurt. Both of them got out of the airplane.
Yeah, technically in Bean's accident, they ejected about 10,000 feet, and they were doing fine. He was already on the radio talking to them in his parachute on the way down. Then he looked down when the airplane hit, saw that the wind was blowing the wreckage and debris flat across the desert, knew he was getting in trouble because of the high winds, and they suffered lower leg injuries, a broken leg on the backseater, and he suffered a knee injury. But obviously much better than Goose in this particular case.
Who broke his neck.
Yeah.
One thing we learned a lot about in doing the research was something called compartmentalization. They teach pilots how to take their problems and put them in boxes, compartmentalize themselves, and put them into little bits and pieces so that they can get on with their lives. They put their family in a little box. They put them away somewhere so that they can do their mission, do their job. It's asking a lot psychologically. I was always really impressed that these guys could pull this off. As writers, we did an A and B section in a sense. There is the A movie, the A half, and the B half. The A half is the fun, wild, hair on fire guys, the hot pilots. And the B side is a story about a guy who's now got to deal with what his aggressive, sort of arrogant behavior caused. We all want him back. I mean, losing Goose it was a tough choice. You create a character that good, you don't want to lose him. Sort of the rules of screenwriting is you don't create great characters and then kill them off early. And there's a big hole in this movie with Goose missing. But it gets filled up, I think, very well in terms of the dramatic tension and Tom's acting and the feeling that Maverick is going through. I always felt that the critics were really harsh on this movie. It got ripped in lots of ways. And I always felt the critics sort of missed it in a huge way. That this movie worked in a more visceral, emotional way and it was not a plot movie. It's not a movie about the mission. Here are the pilots and they're going to go save somebody. It's a movie about the guys. And it's really about the moments and who these guys are and what this world is like, rather than, let's go, into some plot movie that A, B, C, and D. And this is a real moment for a lot of fighter pilots. A lot of these guys lose their friends. It happens. And it is a very hard thing to recover from. As I would interview all these guys, I'd be struck by the fact they all lost things. Now, when I was doing the interviews in the early 80s, of course, that was the post-Vietnam era, so there was a lot of loss in terms of guys who didn't come back from Nam.
Meg Ryan, she cried on cue 22 times every time. They asked her to. They kept doing repeats and repeats and kept trying it and trying it and trying it. And Tony Scott, every time, asked her, to do the scene again. And on cue, she'd cry. It was an amazing thing to watch. I didn't realize that actors could actually do that. And in fact, I've lost all faith in actors and actresses since, because I don't think they tell anybody the truth, because they don't have to. we can't do that kind of stuff. We always have to tell the truth. But she could do it on a moment's notice.
The concept here, compartmentalizing Goose is put in a box. This is how they would do it. They would talk about it. It was part of the process of putting him away, is they would find a box and they'd put these things together as a way to sort of move on with their lives.
In this particular moment here where Tom starts to go out and stops, I think it was a moment he took from something to do with a moment that he had with his family, a death in his family. So it was where he couldn't come to terms with going through that door to face the family. And so we set the shot, designed the shot, and then he went for the door and couldn't get out. They'll close the door again. But I thought it was a great moment.
Touching scene, but very realistic. We've all lost people. Normally, it's the air crew, it's his best buddies that go clean up the room, take care of the personal effects, make sure the wife's taken care of.
Yeah, one of the more difficult things you ever do, and like when you're on cruise, you got to clean out all the guy's stuff and put it in a cruise box and send it back to his wife, and it's really very tough. It is a dangerous job. We've all lost people that we were very close to. And I guess the only way we resolve it is by saying they were doing what they wanted to do. That's what they really cared about the most in the world. And so it's sort of okay. It's not okay, but it's something you got to learn to live with.
This particular scene, this is where Goose's wife is waiting for Tom to come out, and in a way she should have been holding him responsible because he was flying the jet, and they got into trouble because he was too avaricious and he's flying too close to the other jets. That's why they got into trouble. Yeah, but I thought she breaks your heart in this sequence. Yeah, and it's by what she doesn't say rather than what she does say. It's just the emotion that she's feeding, through this particular sequence when she touches Tom on the side of the neck. It was a very strong moment for her.
Now this is a little bit stern, a good Hollywood theatrics, but if you have an accident when it's reviewed, it's a little less formal. It's certainly serious. It's called going in front of the green table, because they always, in the Navy in the old days, covered the table with green felt for one of these things. But you typically wouldn't be in your whites, and typically wouldn't be like a courtroom setting.
But what we had to do is we had to show him vindicated by the Navy but still feel responsible. And this was the only way we could do it, so it actually ended up working out pretty well.
We shot another sequence. We shot up a graveyard we used a naval graveyard where Goose was buried, but that sequence didn't end up in the movie. We went directly from the sequence in his room at the base of the court-martial, where he was exonerated of any blame, but it was a little ambiguous whether he was at fault or not.
Now, I understand pretty much all the actors flew. You got some film of them?
I won't say who. There were one or two who decided they didn't want to fly in F-14s.
I understand they didn't want to fly in
F-14s,
and their quote was, making this movie and we're dying for. We'll leave the
I don't
names
know.
out of it.
I don't know if that's exactly true, but I that may be true. That could be something that actually happened.
But we can vindicate Tom Cruise, because I understand he went up and
Yes,
not
he
unlike
did.
the rest of us got ill, but his comeback was, hell, I've already been sick. Why don't you show me what it'll do?
I think since then he's become a pilot and flies. I think he owns 3 or 4 airplanes and flies his own airplane.
Yeah, and Goose, I think, was the only one that flew and didn't get sick.
Good for him.
That's probably true. But again, Flightline, this is not unrealistic
Concur.
that this couldn't happen.
You can't get back in the saddle. Won't engage. It's only been a few days. He just might not make it back.
This is Tom's first sortie or first training mission after Goose has been killed, after Anthony Edwards has been killed, and he's alone in the locker room with Val Kilmer. I was surprised because Val was very touching in terms of how he dealt with this moment, in terms of saying how sorry he was that Goose had been killed, yeah. And it was funny how Val captured that moment. It was one take, and it was an odd perspective on how to capture that emotional moment, but it was great. And I saw how it reverberated in Tom. It was this one take, and it got Tom and it got me.
We worked out a story with Cash and Epps. We had a story. We knew what we felt the movie would be, and we pitched him that movie. We knew what the movie was going to be, not 100%. Once you have that, then you got to go through actually trying to figure out how to make the movie, because we didn't have a lot of money. $14 million today is a very low-budget film to get a movie made, especially with all this aviation. And what we did is we broke the movie down into 3 or 4 segments, and we did what we considered the ground story, which was all the dialogue and the drama of the piece. And then we had a carrier section where we did all the carrier work. So we had breaks in between these, so the actors had to be on for a very long period of time, but they had downtime in there. And then we did what we considered the cockpit work, which came at the very end, where we did, on a stage, put all the actors in the cockpit. We also put them up in the air in the cockpit and had cameras on. Most of it was unusable because they all threw up, so we couldn't use a lot of them. They kept ducking. Except for Tom. Tom had figured out how to do it, and he was brilliant in the cockpit because he'd been in there before and knew exactly what to do. But the footage of those guys in the cockpit was hysterical, with their eyes rolling back into their head and stuff splattering all over the camera lens. It was not a lot of usable footage. And then we did the air-to-air stuff, and that was the last part of the puzzle, but it was done right before the stage work. So we had all our stuff with the pilots shooting in the air, and these young hotshots with our camera guys who were up in the air with them. And on the ground, we did a lot of work on the ground, from ground to air.
But I wasn't gonna leave without saying goodbye. It's good to see you.
One of the things when we were conceiving the movie was that every fighter pilot movie we had seen, somebody dies in the opening. And we didn't want to do that. With being involved with these guys, you realize how close they are to each other, what good friends they are, and just how much respect they have for each other. And there's a real emotional bond with these guys. They fly together, they fight together, they spend a lot of time together. And the sense that one of them dies would be incredibly emotional. So we felt emotionally, rather than sort of throw it away or treat it lightly, we treated it as I think that we would emotionally feel about it. That became the emotional sort of underpinning of the movie, is just how hard it would be to recover from the death of somebody so close, also in this incredibly dangerous, high-stakes area.
Typically, because we've invested so much money in the aviators by this point and so much time, both landing on the carrier and in this particular case, if you have some trouble, they're going to go out of their way to try to get you back on track, either if it's landing on the carrier day or night, or usually night, or some other performance factor that's not up to snuff, or if you've had an accident. Because we've invested so much money in them already, and if they've shown that they're a good performer, and it clearly, they don't have any problems because the accident was not attributed to them, then we'll make every effort to try to get them back up at 100%.
Gru, I have a question. I just noticed in the last 3 scenes, especially at night or in the macabre setting that we have here, he's wearing that black. I've only seen this movie 1,700 times. Was that done purposely, like a Tale of Two Cities, using the colors or anything like that?
Not that I remember. I think that...
That's what he had in his closet? Good
no,
fighter pilot, he only had one clean shirt?
Well, maybe I wasn't the costume director. I was the technical advisor, not the costume director. Tony Scott was big on T-shirts and blue jeans. The black may have just been in mourning.
See, but now he's feeling better about himself. He's getting back on. He's getting back on the horse. So this is the I'm back on my horse outfit.
It's interesting here. This family is really nice. This is a real fighter pilot family. These guys have wonderful families, great wives, Navy wives, just terrific people. They go out on cruise for 6 months. The family has to exist without them. They're really fun people to be around. The wives are incredibly supportive. They run the household. They've been doing it for years that way. And the guys come back in. It's a tough life. They all give up and sacrifice a lot.
They call that affectionately known as the I Love Me room, where it's kind of interesting. The more senior you get, when you're a lieutenant commander, you want an I Love Me room. And then when you're finally a commanding officer, if you got a great wife, she kind of lets you have your I Love Me room. And then the more senior you get, it turns into an I Love Me closet, and then finally goes down to an I Love Me box stuck in the garage. So obviously Viper here, he's in good shape.
Well,
he's still climbing the ladder with his I Love Me room.
I still have an I Love Me wall. I went over to Wizard's house the other day, and he has an I Love Me room.
He's got an I Love Me house.
He's still on active duty, though, so he can do that. However, he's got the big picture of the airplane that we flew, that we shot down the MiG-21 with in 1972, and I was over at his house the other day, and I looked, and there's the big picture there, and I'm going, I don't have one of those. And he said, well, you didn't talk to the guy that painted it and have him give it to you.
You work the schmooze, no.
It's Mr. Schmooze over here.
We had set this scene originally that Viper had a barn, and actually the scene was set in, he walks Maverick into the barn, where he's built himself a biplane, a wonderful old biplane, but he built the wings too big to get out of the barn, so it's sort of stuck in the barn. But, again, it's really not so germane to this movie. But the concept that we were trying to go for was a sense of a past, because we meet with these guys and they would be able to discuss in detail different engagements from World War II, World War I, different pilots, and they knew the pilots from all sides. They're historians. I like the concept that there's this arrogance, this guy who can take on the world and really believes it, and then just gets knocked on his ass. And does he have the strength to get back up and be able to power through it and recreate himself and rebuild himself up? And that's really what we were examining here. I'd like to know if everybody gets all this oceanfront property. This is hard property to get.
Tom Skerritt did a wonderful job in this movie of being what you would want to see in a CO. He personifies what I think all of us, if we were JOs, would want to have as a CO. He has all the credibility in the world. He soft pedals it. He's sympathetic. At the same time, he has requirements, and he's dealing with a problem the way it should be dealt with.
And he and Jester as the XO play off each other very, very believable. I'm sure that's good technical advisor at work there.
By the way, that he's landing that.
I was just thinking the same
guy's
thing.
got his hook down. He's landing on the field, which we don't do. And landing on the field, we don't do field arrestments very often.
Actually, the way those clouds were too, he was actually landing to the east there. Then Maverick is actually looking to the. He's actually landing to the west when you see Maverick. But for the clouds to be there with that sun at that angle, Tony Scott's working his magic again.
This is the graduation ceremony done at North Island. That's the swimming pool at the Officers Club at North Island Naval Air Station.
We very proudly graduate in our flight suits. So any reason not to get in khakis or whites. So this is very, very, very Hollywooded.
And do you serve champagne?
Well, normally the night before there's a pretty big get-together and champagne amongst other beverages.
After we shot this particular day, we had a little cocktails and food for the crew and around the pool here. And Don Simpson showed up, and everybody got a few drinks inside them, and one thing led to another. And in the end, we started grabbing people and throwing them in the pool as usual. Yeah? And two of the fighter gun pilots grabbed Don to throw him in the pool, and he put up this tremendous fight. And eventually, they got him in the pool and threw him in, and everybody thought it was a big joke. And after 3 or 4 minutes, we realized that Don's lying on the bottom of the pool, not coming to the surface. So we had to dive in and pull him out. We discovered he couldn't swim. And his leather jacket and his cowboy boots are weighing him down.
This would never happen this way. You wouldn't get the orders that way. If they're a Top Gun, they'd
go back to their parent squadron.
They go back to their parent squadron, which would be at Miramar. They wouldn't be deployed.
And exactly, probably normally in one of the early part of the workup. So you're right. These orders would go to the guys that are probably already out there. And I never understood why they use 24 hours later, because that's magic.
Yeah.
I don't think you could physically get there in 24 hours if you took the Concorde over there.
No.
Rescue operation is to begin within the hour. Your mission is to give air support.
The mission is fairly realistic.
There are MiGs in the area and tensions are high. If you witness a hostile act, you will return fire. Those MiGs
One of the things you do have to understand about the United States Navy is that we don't have a lot of airplanes and we don't have a lot of aircraft carriers. And when something like this happens, you are normally going to be going up against a superior force. And so we tend to fly in section where the Air Force might fly in division, and the Air Force might send in 20 airplanes when we can only afford to send in 4 or 8. And so this would be very realistic going into a hostile area, a foreign country, and running up against a large number of airplanes.
I know it's on your mind, Kazansky. Just get on it.
One of the things you see the Navy of today pushing is the value of the sea base, because as you've seen in the recent international events, oftentimes we don't have the opportunity either to employ forces that are based overseas because of agreements with the countries in which they're based, or other countries don't give us rights of transit either in the air or off the ground. So that's where the value of the Navy comes particularly into focus, and where we find ourselves in these kind of situations.
We always knew from the very beginning that we had to have a realistic ending, that although the movie was based on the Top Gun school, unless we basically had a real fight that was dangerous, it just wouldn't finish strong enough. So we knew we'd have some sort of incident. The enemy at that time that they're talking about was the North Koreans, because they were considered a rogue state and having a lot of problems. There was a Pueblo incident, there was all sorts of things. But when it came time to shoot the movie, the State Department basically said, well, we're trying to normalize relationships, so we can't say it's North Korea. So it's sort of vague here, and that's really more of nobody wanted to get anybody angry, so they kept it very vague. It doesn't matter.
You know what I did? I put all the principal actors, I put into the back seat of a real jet, like, with a camera mounted in front of them. For instance, when we got Tom flying, it looks like he's flying in the front seat, but he's actually flying in the back seat. And so we could do maneuvers where they're doing barrel rolls, and you saw the ground and the sky and other jets going by. So all the actors we put through a flight training program where they had to do 3 days of ejection training, just in case when they're up in the air in the F-14 something went wrong, we'd know how to get out, how to eject. Yeah.
Tony was a young director and wanted things done in a very strong visual way, but we had to make sure you could tell the story. I remember one battle we had with Tony where the pilots flew with these visors that were mirrored, so you could see reflections. It looked phenomenal because you could see the clouds going overhead, but you didn't know who the actors were. You couldn't tell one pilot from the other, so that became a huge battle with Tony to try to keep those visors up off their faces so you could see what the kids, because it's hard to act when your eyes are covered and your mouth's covered. All you hear is a voice. He wanted something that he felt was right visually. He wanted something that we felt was right for the story and for the recognition of the audience, for the individual characters. In the end, you got to see the pilot, so it worked out.
One of the criticisms we got from the studio when we handed in the script, there was too much flying in it. They said there's too many flying sequences. Nobody wants to watch a movie that's all these planes flying around. And we tried to convince them that was not the case. That it was something they'd never seen before, and that it was a look and a visual imagery that has never been shot before.
Obviously, we weren't shooting down real jets, so this was Gary Gutierrez who built these model jets and did all the effects, all the special effects for us. But he did a great job, and I think the great job was in terms of achieving the sense of scale and the sense of impact and the true strength of what we're doing then, which you don't have these luxury today when you're in this digital world. The true strength of making something feel real was the speeds at which he shot these different jets impacting each other or wings being blown off. And Gary had an uncanny understanding of what speeds you need to be running the cameras to give a model the same scale that a real jet had. But all this stuff here, these are really the Top Gun pilots or the cameramen. They just had an uncanny sense of where that camera was, and it's like an extension of their body and what that lens was getting, of the other jets when they're in these mid-aerial combats, yeah.
Now, there is a sequence coming up in which we show a bunch of airplanes going round and round, and I'd like to call it a rolling scissors. It was pretty hard to do, but it worked out very well. We put an F-5 with an F-14 behind it, and then another F-5, another F-5, and then just had them start rolling and getting out of phase, and you'll notice that it comes out pretty good. Of the 30 seconds we shot, we probably kept about 15 of it. The odds of taking a hit, by the way, from 20 millimeter or 30 millimeter and surviving, at least the aircraft surviving, are not very good. So when it shows bullet holes in the side of the airplane, that airplane's probably not going to stay in the air very long. Now, this is the part I was talking about, and that's, I think, the only time a rolling scissors has ever been filmed.
But this was our biggest mission, this end shootout we had. I think at any one time we had 8 jets in the air, but we needed to do it to tell our story. But getting 6 jets in the air and trying to coordinate all this all the time was a nightmare. Because on average, one of those jets would not fly. One of those jets, you'd put them up that morning and something was wrong with. They'd have a safety factor wrong, or the fuel lines wouldn't work, or the cameras would go down. So we were continually being surprised when you thought everything was all set and ready to go and things would never go the way you wanted to go.
This was kind of long. Dogfights normally don't last this long, but what I took from it and what we need to take from it is that if it's confusing to you, it's pretty confusing in the air as well. You have situational awareness, you have pieces, but in terms of being able to come back and really construct what all 5 aircraft are doing, or even remember what you did, is a colossal act, and is again one of the things that we try to teach the students to remember in terms of the reconstruction. But this is a furball.
And it's interesting that these things start and end very quickly, and they can start at like 30,000 feet, go down to 10,000 feet, and back up to 15 or 20,000 feet, all in about a minute and a half, in an arena that's maybe 5 miles across. So it's a very large area, both vertically and horizontally, and you got a bunch of airplanes, and then all of a sudden all the airplanes collapse into a fur ball that may be as close as you're seeing here, and then it may go back out, and then all of a sudden you can't find anybody anymore. They're very interesting, the way they form and the way they come and go.
And your goal is not to be fight center.
And you would never be predictable. The whole idea is to remain unpredictable, because if you become predictable, a guy you don't see is going to hit you and shoot you down. There's another model being gotten rid of.
Realistically speaking, again, what you just saw, Maverick obviously extended out and then turned back in. He's going to save the day. Coming back into this fight, it would be very difficult, because you're just going to see lots of specs to figure out which one the good guys are and which one the bad guys are. So you just be very concerned about just launching an infrared missile into that fray, for fear that it'll probably get sucked off on the bigger TF-30 rather than the small MiG-28.
The realistic part of the filming, too, is when you get the passes and the airplanes seem small and they pass very quickly and then go off into the distance, is actually the most realistic of the filming, if you're going to talk about comparison with reality and those things that are staged for the frame, like there, where they become very small very quickly.
The technical work in this movie is spectacular. There were several nominations for the Academy Award, and I was amazed that it didn't win a sound and sound editing, because the sound work in this picture is terrific.
And the dialogue, as it's done here, is fairly realistic. This is a lot of the things that you would probably be saying.
We pride ourselves on what we call comm brevity, making very, very short and concise directive comm. You need to tell guys to move your jet and then clear the radio so that the other guys can get their 2 cents in.
However, in this particular case, we had to sort of explain what they were doing, and so you'll see more comm here than you would normally see, which is something that we argued about, but in fact we had to do it so the people watching the movie would understand a little more of actually what was happening.
That's a really good point.
See, now there, that
hurts.
That airplane's about ready to go down. Probably going to go down within half a minute or something like that.
And again, he's just merely dumping fuel, and it looks like he's been hit.
Yeah. Particularly MiG airplanes all have big cannon. They're shooting like 30 millimeter, 37 millimeter. A lot of them have 30 millimeter cannon. And you get hit by a 30 millimeter cannon, it's an exploding round. You take one and you're probably done. And they're showing 50 caliber hits. And if you got hit like that, you're going to go down.
On the count of 3, brake hard right. 3, 2, 1, brake right. Firing.
By the way, those are real missile shots. We went up to Point Magoo and followed a missile shoot of real missiles. And so the ones you see coming off the airplane are that's real footage. That's a real Sparrow right there.
I think the success of the aerial sequences come from the fact my background was in advertising and in rock videos, and then with my 2 editors, Chris Levinson and Billy Weber, so we were able to put all the coverage together and make it exciting and dangerous and all the rest of it. But in the end, what made it accessible and fun and rock and roll was we cut it to music. We'd hunt around and find a piece of music that, whether it was Kenny Loggins or Berlin or Harold Faltermeyer, would take a piece of music and we'd cut these sequences to music. It feels like the music is almost in sync with the actions, and we'd get Hal to then retune the music to actually fit the beats more, right on the nose. But I honestly believe the success of the aerial sequences came from knowing how, through editing and through coverage, to build a story and build energy and build speed and build danger. In the old Howard Hawks days, those movies, it was one shot, you flew alongside an aircraft and it banked away from you, you did a head-on past an aircraft. And they really lacked that energy and danger, but I think we really did capture the sense of a true dogfight in the air in these Top Gun sequences.
Mustang, this is Maverick requesting flyby.
Negative, Ghost Rider, the pattern is full.
This is not unrealistic,
Yeah,
by the way.
Exactly.
Not realistic. You saw this very scene, Pettigrew.
This is actually you do a flyby. I remember.
I don't care I don't care how low your gas is. You're going to do a flyby.
Well, we did do a flyby, but it was getting dark. It was late, and this is when we really had the engagement. And then my wingman shot down one, and we shot down one. So we ended up engaging 4 MiG-21s and shooting down 2. And we did a flyby like this. Only there was a thunderstorm just ahead of the ship, and when I did the flyby, I did the aileron roll and broke into the thunderstorm. So we went IFR for a little bit and then came around and landed. And then you get out of the airplane and there's everybody there and they're all jumping for joy and going, everybody's screaming and yelling. It's really wonderful. Yeah, just like this, in fact.
I think I'll brag on my 2 Admiral friends here with the MiG killers. It just kind of shows you how there are not that many MiG kills. This is a big deal, and this is very realistic, as they said, what would happen. And again, we're proud to have them amongst us because there's not that many still arcing and sparking around the Navy.
But it's funny, Val and Tom never hung out together because they were these young, intent actors, so they didn't want to cloud their relationship, off screen. So when they came on screen, they always had these edges. But they never spent any time together. And Tom, as I said, did the same with Kelly. He always kept himself to himself. He was very conscientious in terms of his work ethic, and the same with Val. Yeah, and the only time Tom and Val and Kelly came together was when they're on screen.
As writers, this was our first produced movie, and we didn't really expect it to have the impact and be as huge a hit as it was. And then it just sort of struck, and once it struck such a chord nationally in terms of the country, and it still continues to do so. It's really rewarding to still see that this work just sort of stands up. It just sort of, it continues to be a really sort of interesting story with really great characters. And I think what's exciting also is realizing that the right people came together for this movie at the right time. It was Tony Scott was the right director. Don and Jerry were the right producers. We were the right writers. Tom Cruise. We wrote the movie with Tom in mind, and they got Tom. That was fabulous. And then the great casting, everybody, Anthony Edwards. It was just great elements coming together at the same time. Great soundtrack, just the great imagery, the visuals. And once you're around these people and around this environment, it's so seductive, you get caught up in it. And I think that everyone shared the same vision and the same idea. And that's, I think, why this movie has this lasting impression.
You see it all over. I mean, everybody's copying it. The work was copying Top Gun. I mean, leather jackets, the leather business was dead for jackets. And all of a sudden, because Cruise was wearing this leather jacket, it exploded. The white T-shirts, the cowboy boots, the jeans, that whole kind of look that Tony created became real vogue for everybody. And, so, I mean, you set style and fashion, and it became very kind of hip to be in the Navy and become a fighter pilot. And I just remember the Navy telling us years later that no matter where I go, if I'm talking to pilots, it influenced them going to become pilots for the Navy. In fact, I think it was last year or the year before, the number one girl who graduated from Annapolis to become a pilot, and she was number one in her class. They asked her, why did you join the Navy? She said, because of Top Gun. So it still reverberates today, something we did a very long time ago.
Now, this end sequence here is this is what I call the Kansas City barbecue. This is our third attempt at finding an end to the movie. And I think the way we got to this end was Jerry, actually. We shot the end twice on the runway at Miramar, and it didn't work. And in the end, I think what took us there was Jerry found this piece of music, which is the Righteous Brothers. And Jerry said, listen, let's reverse it and work backwards end. So we looked for a piece of music that we thought, he looked for a piece of music that thought would be a good end. So, and he came up with the Righteous Brothers, You Lost That Loving Feeling. And then we said, well, how can we work a sequence around this piece of music? And that's how we worked. We went back to the Kansas City barbecue and put it on the jukebox there. And that's really how we came to end the movie there. It was it's a corny end, but a feel-good end for this particular movie, and it felt dead right for this movie.
I would say that I'm very proud of the movie now. On a daily basis, as I was doing it, I was a little bit concerned. But obviously, the movie came out very well, and I'm very proud of the final product. but I'm even more proud of having been an instructor at Navy Fighter Weapons School. We were just trying to train guys and keep them from getting killed and trying to help the kill ratio and make us better pilots. And little did we know what was going to end up being and that this was going to end up happening. But the most proud I could be is that I was actually a Top Gun instructor. One of the great things I ever got to do in my life. Wizard?
I had grown up always wanting to fly fighters, and it turned out to be better than my dreams. And the best part of that was getting a chance to be a Top Gun instructor and get involved with that all through my career. But particularly all the flying that I did, the most spectacular part of that was the chance to be a Top Gun instructor. So it's wonderful that the movie gave the public a chance to get into that part of a unique world and get a pretty good look at it. Certainly part of it's Hollywood, because it has to be to make it a movie and make it a successful movie. But the spirit of the place, I think, was largely captured, even if it is a little bit of an overblown characterization of the instructors. But the flying, I think, was as good as you're going to get with photography to this point.
Great experience. I think it's something that happened 18 years ago, and nobody at the time, at least the people involved in that, knew how huge the movie was going to be. It's a cult classic. Again, I feel very fortunate to have been a Top Gun instructor. Felt it put me on the, in terms of professionalism and my ability to focus, and pretty much set me on the path to a pretty nice career, with Top Gun movie being just the frosting on the cake.
It's hard because, when you're a part of something and you see it metamorphose of a project, and then when it comes out, you never really gauge, at least I can't gauge if it's going to be a success or not. And I remember we took the movie to Houston to preview it. Unfortunately, it was the weekend that the shuttle disaster happened. So we're sitting in an audience and they're just dead silent. We're looking at this movie with 600 people and nobody makes a sound. And we thought we had the biggest turkey ever. But it just hung in and hung in and hung in and just didn't go away. And for a picture, I think it ended up doing $180 million domestically. I can't imagine what that would be today. That was back in, 85 or 86? So it was an enormous success, and did the same foreign or maybe more. So in today's dollars, I'm sure it's like a Lord of the Rings or, just an enormous, enormous movie.
The movie, obviously, commercially, was a huge success, yeah. It was actually funny, Paramount, everybody was terrified. They thought, the first screening we had at the Paramount Theatre, and it was a rough cut. They didn't think it was going to do anything. I mean, they were frightened. They just thought that, I don't know what the negative, I'm trying to remember why there was such a negative response, but when the movie is finally done and put out amongst to the general public, it had a huge response from the general public in terms of, a fun, entertaining piece of rock and roll, and it made, in that day and age, 1986, I think it was one of the top grossing movies of all time. But the press shredded it. The press hated it. After The Hunger, it took me 4 more years to get Top Gun, and after Top Gun, it was a different life. Then the phone was, between The Hunger and Top Gun, the phone never rang. After Top Gun, the phone didn't stop ringing. But life definitely changed after Top Gun. And I moved to LA permanently, got a Ferrari, got another motorcycle, lost my second marriage. And I hope you guys enjoyed the movie, and thank you.